Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabur Riqaaq. The book of those narrations which are heartfelt. Let's take the first chapter about most of the denizens of Jahannam are going to be women, and most of the inhabitants of Jannah being poor people. From Abdullah ibn Abbas that the Prophet ﷺ said, اطلعت في الجنة فرأيت أكثر أهلها الفقراء واطلعت في النار فرأيت أكثر أهلها النساء. I took a look into Jannah and I saw most of its inhabitants to be poor people. And I took a look into the fire and I saw most of its inhabitants to be women. In another narration, it tells us that the rich people will be held back, except those who will be ordered to go into the fire. So the narrations tell us that the poor people will be given favorable treatment in the hereafter. This is the case if they were patient over their poverty, and so therefore they will have less accounting to give, whereas rich people will have far more accounting to give. So the poor people will be recompensed by entering into Jannah far before the rich people. Some narrations say that they will enter Jannah 40 years before, other narrations talk about 500 years before. What about the women? Why will they be most of the denizens of Jahannam? For a few reasons. Firstly, their character. The Prophet ﷺ informed us that if you treat one of them well all of the time, and then one time you just mistreat her, or she sees something from you that she does not like, she would say that I have never seen any good from you. And also because they curse a lot. So because of la'an, they are cursing much, and because of their kufr, that is their ingratitude, they will be most of the people of the fire. But also they are people of fitna as well, who put men to trials by dressing up in an alluring fashion, as we find in another hadith in the same chapter from Usama ibn Zayd that the Prophet ﷺ said, مَا تَرَكْتُ بَعْدِي فِتْنَةً هِيَ أَضَرُّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. I have not left after me a trial which is more injurious to men than the trial of women. So it is women who are the people of fitna, not men. If a man in public exposes his skin, it will not cause a fitna, as long as he's covering between the navel and the knee. But if a woman does the same thing, it would cause a fitna. And in many countries, you find even the kuffar acquiesce to this idea that the women are people of fitna. Why? Because even in a kafir country, if a man walks the street topless, no police officer would arrest him. But if a woman was to do the same thing, she would be arrested. Why is this? Because of indecent exposure. But that law does not apply to a man. So why the difference? It's because they still have this natural knowledge in their fitrah that women are the people of trial and tribulation, not men. Because it is men who are visually attracted, or if you like, visually responsive. So therefore, the trial on them will be harder. Whereas with women, they are not as visually responsive as men are. One may also argue that women will be most of the people of Jahannam simply because there will be more women in this world than men. So a simple probability and proportion would tell us that you ought to find more women in Jahannam as well. And we already took the hadith talking about the end of times where 50 women will be looked after by one man. So the ratio would be 1 to 50. We take from the narration also that the Jannah and Jahannam are created and present today. Also in the Quran we find about the fire أُعِدَّتْ لِلْكَافِرِينَ and about the Jannah أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, prepared for the kuffar or muttaqin respectively. Also about the poor people, it is the poor people who are more likely to be mu'minun and accept the message of the Prophet. With all the messengers, their followers were from the poor people, those lowly in society. It was always the rich and the chiefs of society who were the rebellious ones because they had most to lose in terms of their wealth and in terms of their status. And often you find in the Quran, it speaks about how the chiefs or the real noblemen would disbelieve. وَقَالَ الْمَلَأُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ قَوْمِهِ. And the chiefs who disbelieved from his people or from his tribe, they said. Also, قَالَ الْمَلَأُ الَّذِينَ اسْتَكْبَرُوا مِنْ قَوْمِهِ لِلَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا لِمَنْ آمَنَ مِنْهُمْ أَتَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّ صَالِحًا مُرْسَلٌ مِنْ رَبِّهِ. The chiefs who were too proud from his people, they said to those who were deemed weak from the believers, do you know that Salih has been sent from his Rabb? They asked this question mockingly. One might ask a question, how could the Prophet have seen the poor people in Jannah and the women in Jahannam when they have not entered it yet? And the answer to that is that the Prophet could have been shown what's going to happen in the future. Also in the chapter from Abdullah ibn Umar that the Prophet used to make dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min zawali ni'matika wa tahawuli afiyatika wa fujaati niqmatika wa jami'i sakhatik. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from your blessing being withdrawn from me, and the change in well-being given by you, and from your sudden wrath, and from every displeasure of yours. It seems to us that this hadith should have been in the Kitab al-Dhikr, but nevertheless we find it here. In any case, this is a useful dua to make regularly, because you are seeking refuge from your fate being changed in a negative way, the blessing of Allah ceasing to exist, or the well-being that Allah gives you changing, or the sudden punishment of Allah descending upon you, and every type of displeasure of Allah Jalla wa Ala befalling you. These are all negative changes of fate. So we seek refuge in that. As for the hadith, مَا تَرَكْتُ بَعْضِي فِتْنَةً هِيَ أَضَرُّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. It speaks of the great danger of women, and the Muslim man must make great effort not to fall into this fitna, because it matters not how physically strong he is. Every man has this weakness, and the shaitan knows all too well about it. And this is particularly difficult if you live in a place which encourages women to be shameless and normalizes it. Clearly this is a destruction of a people's character and their deen. It makes a nation which just wants to chase the pleasure of the stomach and genitalia, just like animals. And this is how you find the enemies of the Muslimin from the Ints trying to attack the Islamic thought and the taqwa of a Muslim man. It is by women. And people are worried about military operations against Muslims. That is nothing, because the worst that can happen is that they will kill you, but you will die upon Iman. But with the women, they will absolutely ruin your deen and your akhlaq, and that is far worse. This hadith tells us that the women are the worst fitna. However, there appears to be an apparent contradiction with this hadith and the other one, also coming up in Sahih Muslim, which talks about the fact that the worst fitna since Adam was created up till the final hour is the fitna of Ad-Dajjal. Well, we understand both of these ahadith in different contexts, and hence there is no contradiction. As far as the women's fitna, then this is the fitna of your character and your chastity, because if you become a promiscuous type who just chases after women and uses them as essentially toys, so you use one woman and you're bored with her, you move on to the next one, and then you get bored with her just like a toy and you move on to the next one, and so on, just like you find the way of life of the kuffar nowadays. This is exactly how it is like. No love, no commitment, no honoring. It is just pure lust, which is a complete deprivation of a man's character and his deen, and hence his akhirah as well. As for the fitna of Ad-Dajjal, then this will be a fitna which will try to take you away from your deen by making you worship him and taking him as a deity. Now, of course, we do not find women asking you to worship them, but Ad-Dajjal will ask people to worship him, and he will also, to prove it, show them amazing signs. It's all deception, of course, but they will appear to be amazing signs. He will call to the sky and it will rain, and he will order the earth and it will grow crops, and the cattle will start to give milk. And in another instance we are told that he will kill a person and then bring him back to life. These are seemingly amazing and miraculous signs. So you can see that type of fitna is going to be different to the fitna of women, but they are both the worst in their own respective way. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, زُيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ وَالْبَنِينَ وَالْقَنَاطِيرِ الْمُقَنطَرَةِ مِنَ الذَّهَبِ وَالْفِضَّةِ وَالْخَيْلِ الْمُسَوَّمَةِ وَالْأَنْعَامِ وَالْحَرْثِ. Beautified for mankind is the love of desires from women. And then there are many other matters as well, but he begins with women, because this is a powerful fitna. So it is vital that the man avoids mixing in with non-mahram women, and it is vital for the Muslim woman to cover herself. All of the Muslim woman is an awrah, and hence the face and hands ought to be covered as well,
although the dominant opinion is that the face and the hands can be uncovered, but it is better to cover them.
The point is that both people are ordered to take their responsibility. Men have to lower the gaze and women have to cover properly, and you avoid free mixing. Even in the masjid, the best rows for the men are the front ones, the first ones, and the worst ones are the last ones. And the best row for the woman is the last one, and the worst ones are the first, because the last row of the men and the front row of the women are going to be closest to each other, as women would pray behind the men. So if that's the case in the salah, then how about other than the salah? In the Salat al-Eid, the women had a separate place entirely. The kuffar would love for the Muslim men and women to mix in with each other. They know this is the way that will destroy a man's deen and akhlaq, character. Why do they do this? Well, because it is the shaitan who inspires them to do so. And from the fitna also, mixed workplaces. This is widespread, but there cannot be any denying that there is severe fitna. So we ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to save us from the fitna of women. Also in the chapter and further to this discussion of the fitna of the women, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reports that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ الدُّنْيَا حُلْوَةٌ خَضِرَةٌ وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مُسْتَخْلِفُكُمْ فِيهَا فَيَنْظُرُ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ فَاتَّقُوا الدُّنْيَا وَاتَّقُوا النِّسَاءَ فَإِنَّ أَوَّلَ فِتْنَةِ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ كَانَتْ فِي النِّسَاءِ. This world is sweet and green, and Allah has made you successors that He may see how you act. So beware of this world and beware of women, because the first trial or fitna of Banu Israel was caused by women. So this world we find is sweet. It has many pleasures and attractions. It is khadira, green. It is nice to look at. You find some amazing scenery around the world. So all of this means that you want more of it and you want to stay forever. He becomes engrossed in this world, and this world becomes the apex of his intentions and desires and concern. But Allah has made you successors so that He may see how you act. So this is all a test. Allah tells us, فَلَا تَغُرَّنَّكُمُ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورِ. Let not the life of this world deceive you, and let not the shaitan deceive you about Allah. He tells us, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. We have made that which is on the earth as an adornment, that we may test you which of them is best in his deeds. So this is a test, beware of it. He tells us, فَاتَّقُوا الدُّنْيَا, and He tells us, وَاتَّقُوا النِّسَاءَ. This is the most pertinent fitna of this world. He tells us, do not fall into the same mistake as that of Bani Israel. Their first fitna was caused by women. So this is why you find the enemies of Islam concentrating their efforts on women, trying to get women to take off their hijab, take off their niqab, trying to get them to mix in with men. It's all revolving around women. They want mixed gatherings in schools, in workplaces, everywhere, all under this guise or this title of human rights and women's rights and equality and all these types of slogans which they like to spew out of their mouths. We find in many places the value of a woman is how lustful she can appear, and that is simply it. And after a while, when she gets older, she is no longer seen as lustful and she is disposed of, no longer valued. We also find from the tactics of the kuffar is that they try to shove the women into male-specific jobs or just any workplace in order to attain free mixing. This is all inspired by the shayateen, yet the kuffar know not. So if that is understood, then it ought to be understood that we are in an ideological warfare, and it is upon those who have knowledge to battle this idea. If it is Muslims you're giving da'wah to, then the dangers of the fitna of women need to be explained, such as with these ahadith. If it is kuffar you're giving da'wah to, then you have to start off with tawheed, because they will never understand this idea about the fitna of women until and unless they first have tawheed incorporated in their mind and body and soul. When they understand the rights of Allah Jalla wa Ala, then they will truly appreciate the words of His Prophet. As for tackling the fitna of the women, then mainly this has to be done by lowering the gaze, and do not even allow the sight of a woman to enter your heart and thus corrupting it. And remember, from the goodness of a person's Islam is to leave alone that which does not concern him. And all of these women who are immodestly and shamelessly dressed, they do not concern you, so do not even look at them. They are not even worthy of your eyesight. Let's move to the next chapter about the story of 3 people trapped in a cave making tawassul to Allah Jalla wa'ala. This is a long narration, so let us get into the translation from Abdullah ibn Umar. He says that the Prophet says that 3 men set out on a journey. It was raining, so they decided to take shelter in a cave, and so it happened that a rock fell and trapped them in. They decided to make dua to Allah Jalla wa'ala using their good deeds. One of them said, "O Allah, I had 2 parents, and I had my wife and children to look after. I tended the flock, and when I came home, after having milked the cattle, I was going to serve the milk to my parents first, but they were sleeping. So I did not want to disturb them, and I did not deem it to be advisable to serve the milk to my children before I served my parents. The children were crying out of hunger, but I remained in that very state until the morning, so I could give the milk to my parents first. O Allah, if I did this, seeking your face, then relieve us from our trouble." And at that, the rock slipped away slightly, but not enough so they could escape. However, they could see the sky. The second man amongst them said, "O Allah, I had a cousin whom I loved more than anyone else. I wanted to commit zina with her. She refused, unless I gave her 100 dinar, and it was difficult for me to collect this money, but I did so, and when I was ready to have intercourse with her, she said, 'O servant of Allah, fear Allah, and do not open the seal except with due right.' And so I got up and left. So if you know that I did this seeking your face, then relieve us." And so the rock slipped away slightly, a bit more, but not enough for them to escape. Then the third man said that I hired out a worker. After he finished his work, I gave him his dues in the form of rice, but he did not accept them. I used these rice as seeds, and I produced crops and collected many cows and flocks in my possession. The worker came back and said, "Fear Allah, and do not oppress me with regards to my dues." I said to him, "Take away this flock of cows and sheep." He said, "Fear Allah, and do not make fun of me." I said, "I am not making fun of you." And so he took them. "O Allah, if you know that I did this seeking your face, then relieve us." And the rock slipped away slightly more, enough for them to leave. This hadith is the basic hadith which proves that you're allowed to make tawassul or seek a closeness to Allah Jalla wa'ala using your good deeds. Notice all of them said, "O Allah, if you knew that I did this seeking your face." So ikhlas is an absolutely vital ingredient for your actions to be accepted, that you do it solely wanting to see the face of Allah Jalla wa'ala in Jannah. The first man made tawassul from his birr of his parents, the second man from his chastity, and the third man made tawassul with his amana, trustworthiness, and wishing well for his brother. Notice this man left off zina. He did so out of the fear of Allah Jalla wa'ala. He did not do so out of another reason, because that would not be a virtuous act. Being chaste is virtuous when you have the means to commit zina, and out of fear of Allah you do not. So for example, if you have the means to commit zina and you're about to do it, and you leave it off because you fear, let's say, somebody might catch you, then this is not virtuous, and you will still have the sin of zina, because you did not leave it off for the sake of Allah Jalla wa'ala. You left it off for someone else's sake. We find that if you are in a time of distress and worry or grief, then righteous actions are a means to relieve you of this distress. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Seek help in salah and sabr. So prayer is the greatest of righteous actions. However, all righteous actions will lead to relief from distress. The second man, in some respects, resembles Yusuf alayhi salam, who also left off zina out of the fear of Allah Jalla wa'ala, even though all the means were easy for him. And we also know from the hadith that such men, Allah Jalla wa'ala will shade them on Yawm al-Qiyamah. We learn from the third man the virtue of being trustworthy and to be sincere to your brother and not to hide anything. It would have been possible for him just to give the worker his dues and to keep the rest of the wealth, but he did not, because all this wealth that he accrued from the original wealth that was to be given to the worker. So he said, well, all the rest of the wealth also must belong to him as well. He could have just hidden it, but he did not. So we find the virtue of being trustworthy. We take from this hadith that Allah Jalla wa Ala listens to and responds to a dua, and it can even be with immediate effect. But whatever your deeds, we cannot stress enough from this hadith that there must be ikhlas, because each and every one of those three men said, "Oh Allah, if you knew that I did this seeking your face, then relieve us." Now this may seem simple enough, but very often you do particular actions for other people, maybe to impress them, or maybe to become known, wanting a status in the eyes of the people. Beware of these pitfalls. People cannot by themselves harm nor benefit you. They can neither punish nor reward you, neither in this life nor in the hereafter. They cannot harm or benefit you in this life except by the permission of Allah, and they cannot harm and benefit you in the afterlife in the absolute sense. So the point is that the whole matter, the whole affair, before death and after death,
belongs to Allah Jalla wa Ala alone. And an obvious benefit from the hadith is the fadila of bir, afaf and amana, because it is these qualities which saved the three folks in the cave. We can also take from this narration that at-tasarruf al-fuduli is permissible, where you act on behalf of someone else's wealth without their permission, but if they approve of it, then it is permissible and in effect. We take this ruling from the third person. Also note again from the third person that he invested this rice and he was able to purchase cows and sheep, and this was the profit from the original wealth, which was the rice. And yet all of this wealth, the rice and the cattle, went to the owner of the original wealth, who came back demanding his payment. And we say this is the correct opinion. If a person invests somebody else's wealth, then all the profit from that investment returns to the owner of the original wealth. And this is the case as long as there was no prior agreement, such as in a mudaraba, because the profits of a wealth are in following the original capital sum. And the ruling is taken from this hadith, and also we can rationalize it. We say that the one who is actually making the investment, he is acting as a wakil, or on behalf of the owner of the wealth. And the wakil is not entitled to anything unless there was a prior agreement. And this opinion is the weightier one amongst the difference of opinions. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Why are women most of the inhabitants of the fire? Question number 2. Recall the 3 ways those 3 men made tawassul in their dua when they were stuck in the cave. Question number 3. Where do the profits of an investment go to? The owner of the wealth or the investor? Give the detail to this answer.